The sun beat down on the dusty barn, each ray illuminating motes dancing in the stale air. Jeb wasn't usually one for spring cleaning, but his father's passing had left more than just dust to contend with. He grunted, pushing aside a stack of old saddles, when his boot nudged something hard beneath a faded canvas tarp. A guitar. Not just any guitar, but his father's old six-string, the one he hadn't seen since he was a boy. He pulled it out, and the light caught something dark, crusted on the strings. Blood. A cold dread snaked through him, tighter than any lasso. His gaze fell to a yellowed piece of paper tucked under the strings, lyrics scrawled in his father's familiar hand. Rusted Spurs and Unfinished Songs, the title read. He plucked the string, a dissonant twang echoing in the quiet barn, and knew, deep in his gut, that this was no ordinary song. This was a secret, a debt, and it was now his. Jebediah, Jeb. Stone wiped sweat from his brow with the back of a calloused hand, the familiar scent of hay and horsehide filling his lungs. For 20 years, this ranch, tucked away in the sprawling, sun-baked plains of West Texas, had been his world. Now, with his father, Elias, gone, it felt both vast and impossibly small. The morning routine was always the same. Feed the horses, check the fences, mend whatever was broken. But today was different. Today, he was clearing out Elias's barn, a task he'd put off for weeks. It was more than just junk. It was a lifetime of his father's silence, packed away in dusty corners. He was wrestling with a stubborn, splintered crate of old tools when a shadow fell across the barn entrance. "Mornin', Jeb," a voice drawled, familiar as the creak of his own porch swing. It was Martha, the closest thing to family he had left. Her face, etched with lines from years of sun and worry, still held a spark of the sharp-witted woman who'd known his father since they were kids. She carried a basket, overflowing with fresh-baked bread and a thermos. "Figured you'd be needing a bite. This old barn ain't gonna clean itself." Jeb nodded, offering a weak smile. "Much obliged, Martha." He picked up a rusty wrench, turning it over in his hand. Just so much of him in here. His gaze drifted to the back of the barn, where a mound of old tarps lay like forgotten ghosts. He felt a strange pull towards them, an instinct he couldn't name. He knew his father kept things hidden, not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated need for privacy. But the past few weeks, a nagging feeling had settled in his gut, that there was more to Elias than he'd ever let on. He knelt, pulling back a tattered canvas, and that's when he saw it. Elias's old guitar, tucked away beneath a stack of worn-out saddle blankets. A lump formed in Jeb's throat. He hadn't seen that guitar since he was a boy, not since Elias had stopped playing. He picked it up, feeling the familiar weight of the weathered wood. The strings were caked with dust, but something else, something dark and flaky, was smeared across the fretboard. He brought it closer, his heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. Blood. Dried. Dark. Undeniably blood. "What is it, Jeb?" Martha asked, her voice laced with concern. He didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the macabre stain. Then he noticed a folded piece of paper, tucked precariously beneath the strings. He pulled it free, his fingers trembling slightly. It was a handwritten song. Lyrics scrawled in his father's distinctive, sprawling hand. The title, stark and foreboding, read, "Rusted Spurs and Unfinished Songs." A cold certainty settled over him. This wasn't just a song. This was a message. A hidden piece of Elias's life, a secret he'd carried to his grave. And now, Jeb had to unearth it. He looked at Martha, his face pale beneath the dust. "Martha, I think Pa had a secret, a big one." He knew, with a chilling clarity, that his life on the ranch, once predictable and calm, was about to be irrevocably altered. The bloodstains on the guitar strings felt like a brand on Jeb's soul. He spent the rest of the morning trying to make sense of the cryptic lyrics, his mind racing, but the words offered more questions than answers. Whispers of a debt unpaid, one line read, under a sky of unforgiven rain. Debt? What kind of debt could his father, a man of simple honesty, have owed? And to whom? The afternoon sun blazed, turning the dusty ranch into a shimmering mirage. Jeb decided a trip to town was in order, maybe a chat with Sheriff Brody, a man as old and weathered as the county itself, and a longtime acquaintance of his father's. The drive into Harmony Creek was a familiar ritual, the old Ford truck rattling down the unpaved road, kicking up plumes of red dust. The town square was quiet, just a few stray dogs dozing in the shade of the old oak tree. Sheriff Brody sat behind his desk, polishing a worn badge, his eyes crinkling at the corners as Jeb entered. "Jeb Stone," he grunted, a cloud of pipe smoke circling his head. "To what do I owe this unannounced pleasure?" Jeb held up the guitar. "Found this in Pa's barn." "And this?" He handed Brody the sheet of lyrics, the bloodstains still unnerving. "There's blood on it, Sheriff. And these lyrics, they hint at something, a debt." Brody took the paper, his gaze sharp, unreadable. He unfolded it slowly, reading each line, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The silence in the small office stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting Jeb's. "Elias was a good man, Jeb, but he had his share of ghosts, same as any of us." He paused, a long, drawn-out silence that spoke volumes. "Some debts, they ain't just about money. They're about blood and promises." A chill went down Jeb's spine. "You know something, don't you, Sheriff?" Brody sighed, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Long time ago, before you were born, Elias had a run-in with a man named Silas Thorne. Mean as a rattlesnake, Silas was. Ran a little operation north of here. Dealt in. Well, let's just say his business wasn't always legal." Brody's eyes narrowed. "Elias owed him. Not money, exactly. Silas had something on your pa, something that could have ruined him. Elias paid his dues, or so I thought." "What kind of dues?" Jeb pressed, his voice tight. Brody simply shook his head, a grim line set on his lips. "That's a story for another time, son. But Silas, he disappeared about 10 years back. Folks say he just rode off. Others say something more permanent happened. He had a younger brother, too, Leon, a hot-headed fool, even worse than Silas." Jeb felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The guitar, the blood, the lyrics, it was all clicking into place, a dark mosaic. "So, this isn't just about Pa. It's about Silas Thorne. And Leon." Brody nodded slowly. "Could be. But Leon, he vanished too, a few years after Silas. Most folks reckon he just followed his brother's path into the dust. You'd be wise to let sleeping dogs lie, Jeb. Some secrets are best left buried." But Jeb couldn't. His father's unfinished song, the dried blood. It was a burden he couldn't simply shrug off. He clenched his jaw. "I can't, Sheriff. This is Pa's story. And now it's mine." He felt a shift within him, a quiet determination hardening his resolve. Brody, seeing the unwavering glint in Jeb's eyes, knew arguing was futile. He had seen that same look in Elias's eyes years ago. "All right, Jeb," Brody said, his voice low. "But if you go digging, you might just unearth more than you bargained for." Silas Thorne had a reputation for not forgetting a slight. And Lon, he was even less forgiving. The sheriff's words hung in the air, a premonition. Jeb felt a growing sense of dread, a chilling certainty that in seeking answers, he had just lost something invaluable, his peace of mind. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple as Jeb left Harmony Creek. Brody's words echoed in his head, a relentless drumbeat. Silas Thorne, Leon, a debt of blood and promises. The old Ford rumbled down the dirt road, each bump jarring him back to the present. Yet his mind kept slipping back to a time long past. He remembered a scorching summer day when he was just a boy of 8. He was hiding in the barn, playing with a rusty toy horse, when he heard voices from outside. His father's, low and strained, and another, sharp and menacing. Jeb had crept to the cracked barn door, peering through a narrow gap. 2 men stood facing his father, their faces grim. One was burly, with a cruel smile. Silas, Jeb now realized. The other, younger, with eyes like flint. Leon. He couldn't make out the words, but the tension was palpable, a live wire humming with danger. Then, Silas had grabbed his father by the collar, shaking him, his voice a low snarl. Elias had looked defeated, his usual calm replaced by a fear Jeb had never seen before. A memory, long buried, resurfaced with a painful clarity. His father, bleeding from a cut on his cheek, later that day, explaining it away as a fall. But Jeb had known, even then, it was a lie. Now, that memory, once a blurry nightmare, sharpened into focus, laced with a bitter understanding. He felt a surge of anger, not at his father, but at the secrets that had weighed him down, at the men who had threatened him. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The plains, once a comforting expanse, now felt like an open wound, holding countless untold stories. He passed the turnoff for his ranch, driven by an inexplicable need to follow a different path. He remembered his father, once in a rare moment of introspection, mentioning an old, abandoned homestead, far north, near the Red River. A place where old scores get settled, one way or another, Elias had murmured, a faraway look in his eyes. Jeb had dismissed it then as an old man's ramblings, but now the words resonated with a chilling significance. The dirt road narrowed, the familiar brush giving way to sparse, gnarled mesquite trees and thorny cacti. The air grew drier, hotter, the sky stretching endlessly above. This was the true desert, unforgiving and silent. After what felt like hours, a faint, decaying structure appeared on the horizon. A derelict farmhouse, leaning precariously, its windows like empty eyesores. This had to be it. He pulled the truck to a stop, the engine sputtering into silence. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the tall, dry grass. He stepped down, feeling the oppressive heat, the dust crunching beneath his boots. The house was a ghost of what it once was, wood bleached by the sun, paint peeled away in ragged strips. As he approached the porch, a glint of metal caught his eye. Something buried in the dirt, half exposed. He knelt, digging with his bare hands, and pulled it free. A rusted spur. Not just any spur, but one with an intricate, almost forgotten design, similar to a carving he'd once seen on his father's old saddle. And then he saw it, etched into the metal, barely visible, a single faded initial, and Silas Thorne. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him. Anger at his father's hidden past, a deep sense of betrayal, and yet an overwhelming need to understand, to set things right. The decision was clear, stark as the desert landscape. He could turn back, let the past remain buried, or he could step into the shadow of his father's secrets, confront whatever awaited him. His heart pounded with a fierce resolve, overriding the logical voice of caution. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he had to follow this path, even if it led him into the heart of a storm. The rusted spur, warm in his hand, felt like a tether to the past, pulling Jeb deeper into the tangled web of his father's life. He pushed open the creaking door of the old farmhouse, the wood groaning a mournful protest. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the stale scent of decay. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the boarded-up windows, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like specters. He moved through the skeletal rooms, each one stripped bare, a silent testament to a life long gone. He found the cellar door, half hidden beneath a pile of rotting planks. He tugged, and it opened with a groan, revealing a gaping black hole. A wave of dread washed over him, a cold premonition of what might lie beneath. He lit a match, its flickering flame barely piercing the oppressive gloom. The steps were treacherous, crumbling beneath his weight. At the bottom, the air was still and heavy, carrying the faint metallic scent of rust and something else, something cloying and unsettling. He took another step, and then he heard it, a faint scratching, followed by a low, guttural growl. His heart leaped into his throat. He spun around, the match trembling in his hand, and saw a pair of eyes glowing in the darkness, feral and wild. A figure emerged from the shadows, gaunt and skeletal, hair matted and eyes wide with a manic gleam. It was a man, but barely. His clothes were ragged, his skin like parchment stretched over bone. "Who are you?" Jeb demanded, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The figure snarled, a sound more animal than human. "You ... You're Elias's boy." The voice was hoarse, raspy, as if unused for years. "Leon." Jeb felt a jolt of recognition, a chilling confirmation of Brody's words. This was Silas Thorne's brother, the one who had vanished. "What do you want?" Leon's laugh was a dry, rattling cough. "Justice. For my brother, Elias. He stole from us. Stole what was rightfully ours." His eyes, disturbingly bright, fixed on Jeb. "He owed us. And now you'll pay his debt." Jeb stood his ground. "My father stole nothing. He was a good man." "Good?" Leon spat, taking a shuffling step closer. "He betrayed us. He ran like a coward, leaving Silas to rot." His words were laced with a venomous rage that vibrated through the dusty air. This land, this was Silas's land. He had a claim. Your father, he tricked him out of it. And Silas, he disappeared, just like that. But I stayed. I waited. For you. Jeb felt a surge of cold fury. My father was no thief. He worked his land, honestly. Honesty. Leon roared, his voice rising to a fever pitch. He lunged, a rusty, glinting blade appearing in his hand as if from nowhere. Jeb barely dodged, stumbling back, the match falling from his grasp, plunging them into suffocating darkness. The clang of the blade against stone echoed in the blackness. Jeb moved by instinct, the years of ranch work, of quick reflexes, kicking in. He could hear Leon breathing heavily, his every movement a testament to his desperation and madness. He heard another scrape, closer this time. He swung wildly, his fist connecting with something soft, then hard. Leon grunted, but kept coming. Jeb knew he was outmatched in the dark, against a man fueled by years of festering bitterness. He needed light, an advantage. He fumbled in his pocket, desperate, his fingers closing around the Zippo lighter he always carried. He flicked it open, the sudden burst of flame illuminating Leon's contorted face, his eyes gleaming with murderous intent. Leon hesitated for a fraction of a second, blinded by the sudden light. It was all Jeb needed. He kicked out, catching Leon in the stomach, sending him sprawling backwards. The blade skittered across the concrete floor. Jeb scrambled, grabbing it before Leon could recover. He stood over the gasping figure, the rusty knife in his hand, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Leon lay there, defeated, but his eyes still burned with an unsettling madness. You won't escape this," he wheezed. "The debt. It will always find you." Jeb stared down at him, the weight of the knife in his hand, the bitterness of the truth in his heart. Everything felt lost, the innocence of his father, the simple life he'd known. He had confronted the ghost of his father's past, and it had been uglier, more brutal than he could have ever imagined. But the confrontation wasn't over. Leon's words hung in the air, a chilling promise of more to come. Jeb stood in the dusty cellar, the rusty knife still heavy in his hand, the flickering flame of his lighter casting dancing shadows on the walls. Leon, defeated but not broken, lay on the floor, his mad eyes still fixed on him. Jeb's leg throbbed where Leon had grazed him, a hot, searing pain that mirrored the ache in his soul. He had faced the monster, but the victory felt hollow, tainted by the bitter truths he'd unearthed. His father, the man he thought he knew, had carried this burden, this secret life, leaving it for Jeb to discover in such a brutal way. He felt the familiar pang of loneliness, a cowboy's constant companion, amplified now by the profound sense of isolation the revelations had brought. Even with Brody's vague hints, and now Leon's deranged confessions, a large part of Elias's story remained fragmented, incomplete. He had confronted Leon, yes, but what about the original debt, the one owed to Silas? And where was Silas? Leon had spoken of him as if he were still alive, still waiting. He dragged Leon out of the cellar, tying his hands securely, and then stumbled out of the abandoned farmhouse into the fading light. The vast, empty landscape stretched before him, indifferent to his turmoil. He needed to think, to piece together the fragments of this grim puzzle. He started the truck, the engine roaring to life, and drove aimlessly, the silence in the cab punctuated only by the rattling of the old vehicle. He drove past the Red River, its sluggish waters reflecting the last vestiges of twilight. And then he saw it, a glint of metal in the fading light, partially buried in the riverbank. He stopped the truck, his heart pounding with a sudden dreadful premonition. He climbed out, the air growing cooler, carrying the damp scent of the river. He walked to the spot, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. He knelt, pushing away the loose dirt, and unearthed a rusted, leather-bound satchel. It was old, weathered, but something about its shape, its worn leather, sent a jolt through him. He remembered his father, years ago, telling him about a fishing trip along the Red River. Elias had lost his lucky satchel, he'd said, laughing it off as a minor inconvenience. But now, seeing it, a cold dread crept into Jeb's gut. He pulled it open, his fingers fumbling with the stiff clasp. Inside, nestled among a few yellowed papers and a small tarnished silver locket, was a single rusted spur. Not like the one he found earlier. This one was smaller, more ornate, with a peculiar shaped engraving. A chill wind swept across the river. He pulled out the locket, opening it. Inside, faded but still recognizable, were two photographs, one of a young Elias, and the other, a woman Jeb didn't recognize, but whose face held a striking resemblance to the faded portrait in his father's study, a woman his father had rarely spoken of. He looked from the locket to the spur, and then a realization, cold and stark, hit him with the force of a physical blow. The S-shaped engraving on the spur wasn't for Silas. It was for Silas Thorne's sister. And the woman in the locket? She wasn't just a distant relative. She was Silas's sister. And his father, Elias, had been in love with her. The blood on the guitar, the debt unpaid? It wasn't about land or money, or even just some vague betrayal. It was about a love affair, a forbidden one, that had somehow led to Silas's disappearance and Leon's madness. The initial encounter with the bloody guitar, the mysterious lyrics, it all made a terrible, coherent sense now. His father hadn't been paying a debt. He had been protecting a secret, a profound, tragic love, and a desperate act to keep it hidden. A new path, fraught with even greater risks, lay before him. He could simply walk away, leave the truth buried in the riverbed, or he could pursue it, unearth the final, devastating piece of his father's story. With the rusted spur and the locket in his hand, a mixture of courage and profound doubt swirling within him, Jeb knew he had to finish what his father had started. The moon hung high, a pale, silent witness to Jeb's journey. He sat by the river, the satchel's contents spread before him, the ornate spur, the locket, and the faded photographs. His father, so reserved, so private, had loved a Thorne. Silas's sister. The implications of this hidden love, the reason for Silas's disappearance, the true meaning of the debt unpaid. began to unravel in his mind, like a tightly wound rope finally coming undone. He stayed there until dawn, the chill of the morning air doing little to numb the ache in his heart. He understood now. Elias hadn't stolen land. He had loved a woman connected to a dangerous family. Silas, driven by greed and a twisted sense of family honor, must have seen Elias's love for his sister as a betrayal, a theft of something more precious than land. The blood on the guitar wasn't from Elias. It was from a desperate struggle, perhaps a final, fatal confrontation. The debt was not money, but Silas's life, taken, perhaps, to protect the woman Elias loved, or even to protect Jeb himself from the wrath of the Thorne family. Leon's madness, his lingering presence, was the last bitter echo of that bloody history. He returned to the abandoned farmhouse, the rising sun casting long shadows behind him. Leon was still there, tied and raving, his eyes fixed on some unseen tormentor. Jeb knelt before him, the locket in his hand. "Leon," he said, his voice calm, quiet, "this is your sister." Leon flinched, his eyes losing some of their wildness, a flicker of something human crossing his face. He stared at the locket, at the faded image of his sister, a woman he probably hadn't seen in years. A tear, thick with dust and sorrow, traced a path down his grimy cheek. The anger, the madness, seemed to drain from him, leaving behind only a profound, heartbreaking weariness. Jeb knew he couldn't leave Leon to rot. The old ranch house, once a prison of Elias's secrets, now felt like a place where healing could begin. He drove Leon to Harmony Creek, not to Sheriff Brody's office, but to Martha's. Martha, who had known his father's secrets, who understood the quiet sorrows of the land. She took Leon in, her eyes filled with a compassion that transcended the old animosities. "Some wounds run deeper than flesh and bone, Jeb," she murmured, watching Leon from the porch. "But even the deepest wounds can heal, with time and kindness." Jeb returned to his ranch, the setting sun bathing the plains in a golden glow. The barn, once a place of unsettling discovery, now felt different. He walked to where the guitar had been, picking it up. The bloodstains remained, a permanent mark, but they no longer felt like a curse. They were a testament to his father's unwavering love, his courage, and the sacrifices he had made. The song, Rusted Spurs and Unfinished Songs, was no longer just a cryptic message. It was a ballad of a life lived in shadows, a love fought for, a debt paid in blood and sacrifice. He sat on the porch swing, the guitar resting on his lap. He didn't play, not yet, but he knew eventually he would. The land stretched out before him, vast and quiet, holding countless stories yet untold. Elias was gone, but his spirit, his quiet strength, resonated in every creak of the old house, every whisper of the wind through the tall grass. Jeb was no longer just a rancher. He was a guardian of a legacy, a keeper of a profound and poignant secret. He had faced the past, endured the confrontation, and found a different kind of peace. The rusted spurs remained, but the song, once unfinished, was now imbued with a new profound meaning. And as the first stars began to prick the darkening sky, Jeb knew that some debts are never truly repaid, but simply transform into new beginnings.